Hello, my name is Shelley Rowe. I'm a disability advocate and activist. I work as the AIM administrator, and I've been a member of the Maxability Task Force here in Southeast Minnesota for the past 5 years.
Hi, my name is Evie Wold. I work for Vocational Rehab Services in Minnesota here, and I'm also part of the Maxability Task Force with Shelley out of the Rochester area. And we want to welcome you to this bite-sized disability learning module on reasonable accommodations. To begin this module, we felt it was important to explain why this and other disability modules for business were created. Disabilities affect 25% of Americans and influence today's drive for a strong economy and diverse workforce. The intent of these modules is to help business in their disability inclusion efforts and to provide disability education that is simple, impactful, and relatable. Each module is just 15 minutes or less and can be delivered either virtually or in person at a team meeting or huddle. And the goal of these modules is to further your work group's understanding of various disability topics and ways of creating an inclusive work environment to successfully hire, onboard, and retain employees with disabilities. Today's module is just one in a series, so we encourage you to watch them all to learn more about the opportunities in this disability inclusion space. As an employer, you may already be providing job accommodations, you just don't call it that. Have you ever done anything differently to allow an employee to stay on the job or be more effective? Have you changed a work schedule to accommodate transportation or daycare? Let an employee work from home? Moved or rearranged a workspace? Well, then you've provided an accommodation. Today, we will be discussing providing reasonable accommodations for employees or applicants with disabilities. This is basically the same concept. It's making a change to how we have typically done things to remove barriers for people to work. In the module on the Americans with Disabilities Act, you learn that 1 in 4 people you may meet has a disability. That's about 61 million people in the United States with disabilities. If you take a moment to think about people you know in your family and in the community, do you know a person with a disability? It spans all ages, education levels, genders, ethnicities, and racial categories. So who is a person with a disability, you ask? The ADA defines disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. You also learn that you must perform the essential functions of a job with or without an accommodation. Essential functions are the basic job duties that an employee must be able to perform. In this module, we'll be looking at what those accommodations are and the process of getting the right accommodations in place, which is also known as the interactive process.
We are not the ADA police or lawyers. We hope to give you plain language information today, not legal advice. But we will be giving you resources for you to dig into more. What is a reasonable accommodation? Reasonable accommodations are changes in the workplace that ensure applicants or employees with disabilities can participate in activities and tasks, as well as have access to environments.
In Title I of the ADA, it states there are 3 areas in which reasonable accommodations may be needed. Adjustments to the job application process so people with disabilities can be considered, modifications to the physical work environment or the way a job is usually performed so an individual with a disability can perform the essential functions of the position, and changes that enable an employee with a disability to enjoy equal benefits and privileges of employment, like those that are enjoyed by other employees without a disability. This may include access to cafeterias, lounges, auditoriums, and company-provided transportation.
Let's go over an example of a reasonable accommodation. Sarah has post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, from experiences in the military. She is a staff accountant at a manufacturing company. Sarah experiences sensitivity to loud sounds and has trouble concentrating. Sarah and her supervisor work together to identify accommodations. Sarah moved her office location further from the shop, listens to headphones and installed free to low-cost apps on her phone to help stay organized and on time for deadlines.
One important factor to remember is that each applicant and employee are unique, and each employer and workplace are unique. Accommodations are determined based on two variables: the specific essential functions of the job and the benefit to the person with a disability. That's why reasonable accommodations should be considered on a case-by-case basis to determine the effective solution. Not everyone needs an accommodation just because they have a disability. And with every disability, there's a spectrum. You may have heard the saying, one person with autism is one person with autism. Two people with the same disability can have different accommodations, even in the same job. Accommodations need to be unique to that individual and that job.
Let's look at an example of this. The Federal Aviation Association employs two air traffic controllers at their Paradise, USA location who have autism, Sarah and Justin. Both are excellent employees who experience their disability in different ways. Sarah struggles with interpersonal relationships and asks for a mentor at work to help her navigate social situations and make good work relationships. Unlike Sarah, Justin makes friends easily and enjoys social contact. He struggles with light sensitivity and uses fluorescent light and computer screen glare filters to reduce glare. Justin also meets with his supervisor one-on-one weekly to give and get feedback on his performance, as it is very important to him and will help reduce his work stress.
The ADA requires employers to engage in a process that can be formal or informal, known as the interactive process, with the applicant or employee making the accommodation request. The interactive process helps everyone to better understand what is needed and how to identify an effective solution through dialogue. As you can see on this slide, there are multiple steps to the interactive process. This model was adapted from the Ohio Office with Disabilities website. Let's dive into more detail on each of these steps.
The beginning of the interactive process is when a request is made. An accommodation request can come at different times and in many different ways. The request can be made at any time during the hiring process or during employment. The request may be made in the employee's preferred form of communication. It can be spoken, written, emailed, or someone can make the request for them.
When an applicant or employee communicates a concern or barrier with the hiring process or in the workplace and relates this to a disability or a medical condition, the employer should treat this as a request for a reasonable accommodation. If it's not clear whether a request has been made, the employer should ask the applicant or employee to clarify what is needed and why. One helpful tip is to provide training for managers and supervisors on how to recognize a request and what steps to take when one is received, because often those frontline managers are the first people employees go to when requesting a change at work. After a request has been identified, the next step is to collect information to move forward. This again needs to be a meaningful dialogue between the employer and the person with the disability. At this stage, you'll be collecting information on the disability and the functions of the person's job that need to be accommodated. If the disability is obvious, you should not request medical documentation. If the disability is not obvious, an employer may ask the employee questions to understand the nature of the disability to ensure they meet the definition of disability under the ADA and its impact on the job or the application process. If the employee doesn't know, an employer may request medical documentation to analyze the situation and make an informed decision. Request what is necessary and nothing more. Some companies utilize forms for requesting disability and accommodation information. Although this isn't required, it can be a helpful standardized way to gather the needed information. Remember to ensure these forms are accessible and to keep this information confidential and stored safely apart from the employee's personnel file.
Depending on how long the person has had the disability and the experience of the person, The employer or applicant with a disability may come up with the most cost-effective solutions. It's important to keep the employee as an active participant in the conversation, as they are your most important resource.
First, ask the employee or job candidate what ideas they have or what they've used in the past that's been beneficial. If they're unsure, there are many resources available, such as audiologists, low vision specialists, occupational and physical therapists, and other medical professionals. They can all be good resources. The Minnesota STAR program is a state agency that assists with technical assistance, device demonstrations, and a loan program. Vocational rehab services, Minnesota's Deaf and Hard of Hearing services, and state services for the blind have assistive technology specialists and employment professionals that can provide free consultations. AskJan.org, also known as the Job Accommodation Network, is a wonderful resource for identifying potential reasonable accommodations based on the disability type. The ADA National Network is a resource that can provide information, guidance, and training. And once accommodation options are identified, the applicant or employee with a disability and the employer should work together to determine the effectiveness of each option. Once you have all the information, it's time to choose the accommodation that will work the best for the employee and the company. Most often, the accommodation will be identified and agreed upon, but in some cases, a negotiation will need to take place. The employer has the right to define what is reasonable as an accommodation. If there's more than one effective solution, the employer can choose the lesser expense or easier option. Now, with that said, the employer is encouraged to work with the employee with disability to make sure it in fact works for them too. Sometimes no one knows for sure if it will work. In this case, have the individual use it on a trial basis and make sure everyone is giving input on the effectiveness. What happens if after exploring all accommodation, the chosen accommodation creates an undue hardship? Let's talk about that. An undue hardship is a modification requiring significant difficulty or cost when considered in light of the factors such as the employer's size, financial resources, and the nature and structure of its operation. This means that an undue hardship refers not only to financial difficulty, but to accommodations that are unduly extensive, substantial, or disruptive, or those that would fundamentally alter the nature or operation of the business. An employer must assess on a case-by-case basis whether a particular accommodation would cause undue hardship.
Let's go over an example of an undue hardship. A lab tech at a small rural clinic has excellent technical skills, but experiences high levels of social anxiety and struggles with communicating with patients and colleagues. He requests that another employee be hired to handle patient interactions and sample collection. This request could affect the fundamental nature of the clinic's services, which is providing quality patient care, and the clinic does not have the budget to hire an additional employee. The employee or manager may explore other options, but this accommodation would be considered an undue hardship. If an undue hardship is purely financial, an employer must consider all outside sources of funding before determining that it is in fact an undue hardship. There are many resources mentioned in the last slide.
Keep in mind that more than half of all accommodations cost nothing at all. When cost was involved, the average cost was about $500, according to AskJan.org. When factoring the cost of employee turnover, accommodating one of your employees could actually save you time and money. So strongly consider using the employee's preferred accommodation when possible. Once you've chosen an effective solution, it's time to implement the reasonable accommodation and monitor the effectiveness. Keep in mind that our workplace is ever changing. Factors like supervisory changes, new equipment, and even external factors like a pandemic can make a significant impact on how our work is done. Because of this, there should be an open door policy for an employee to talk with their supervisor or HR department about how the accommodation is going if there are additional needs or concerns. Sometimes other employees will notice the change or accommodations that have been made. They may have questions. It's important to remember that if an employee asks about a coworker's accommodation, the employer may not reveal that the employee is receiving an accommodation, because doing so would disclose the employee has a disability, and that's prohibited. An employer may respond that it's the employer's policy to assist employees at work, and that these matters are personal and confidential. Ensure the employer's direct supervisor is ready for these types of questions and how they should be handled. Remember that a lot of accommodations actually benefit other employees as well. A best practice to use is to provide information to all employees at orientation on programs such as FMLA, the ADA, and Workman's Comp.
So in summary, reasonable accommodations are changes in the workplace or processes that ensure applicants or employees with disabilities can participate in activities and tasks, as well as access environments. You most likely are already making accommodations, you just didn't realize it. One size doesn't fit all. Even two people with exactly the same disability can have varying needs when requesting accommodations.
Recognizing the need or request for an accommodation, researching options, and providing an accommodation is an ongoing conversation and can benefit more than just the applicant or employee. There are many resources available to assist you and the individual in identifying the best possible accommodation that is really reasonable and effective. As a further wrap up to our module, we ask that you take a bite out of learning and have a discussion with your team. We have a takeaway card for you to reference with this assigned activity. The first question we would like you to talk about is, what has been your experience working through an accommodation request? And the second activity we ask you to do is role play with a coworker. One coworker asks for reasonable accommodation for a disability of their choice. Work together through each step of the interactive process. And you can pause this recording now to work on the activity. If you have questions about this module or need further resources for hiring and retaining individuals with disabilities in your workplace, you can reach out to disabilityinclusion.deed@state.mn.us. And here are several great resources for you to tap into related to this reasonable accommodation topic. Navigating the reasonable accommodation process, the Ohio with Disabilities website, information for employers, the Job Accommodation Network, and the US EEOC.
Thank you for taking a bite out of learning. Getting to the core of recognizing and implementing a request for reasonable accommodation process will help us all to build a more disability inclusive environment.